Hey, welcome. You have landed on my little YouTube video I call The Process. My name is Dr. John Bush. This is lesson 26 here. We're rocking and rolling. This is fantasy football data analysis, the professor's way. We're trying to help you win your fantasy football drafts. My data says that's about a 60% of the game as far as redraft. And we have finished with quarterbacks. We've done uh, running backs, and now we're at tight ends. And this is a positional analysis. This is actually part 1A. I'm sorry, I should have changed the title because we actually got part 1B. I found that 30 something slides is too much for me. I wear out, my head explodes. So we broke part one into two segments here. Okay, so let's get rolling here. Again, I'm a university professor. I've been teaching since 1995, believe it or not. And I love fantasy football, and this is fun for me. And it makes me look at the data. Okay, so that's all good. Positional analysis, tight ends. That's where we're at. Let's see if my little squiggle thing is here. There it is. Yep. Hey, hey. Okay, so, and hopefully you're not new. If you are, you should start at the beginning, I think. I understand some people are not linear. Got that. They like to jump around. The only issue with that, and hey, I do it too. Okay, so I'm not going to say don't, but the only issue you miss is when I do a series, even though my style kind of is maybe a little wacky. Uh, I usually assume you've seen material before, so I don't cover maybe things that if you're looking at this for the first time that you would need. So when you see this, this is the average fantasy points for all tight ends, not just the best tight ends. Every tight end that was scoring points. And so the position is tight end the year 02 to 2020. I like to focus on the broad landscape first, and then we drill down. Okay, you don't see a lot of people doing that. At first, it takes a lot of effort to dig the data, make the figure, do all that kind of stuff, and then sit here and you flap around about it. So this is the position, or so the end of the season, position 1, 2, 3, all the way to 12. So this is your top 12 tight ends. Their average in 2002 overall average fantasy point 136.6. Okay, I use colorization to amplify the metrics, and in case of the total averages, if you start over here, then average of fantasy points, and we go down 18 years, we see we run into this interesting segment of years where things were really hot and going well for tight ends. And previous to that, tight ends were not producing much, so there was this kind of wasteland that was happening pre-2008. Somebody turned the light switch on in 2009 to, was it 2015? Tight ends were really rocking and rolling. And then we dropped back down, not to the worst levels, but not at the best either. So, but we're still, collecting nice little points there, 182 on average of the top 12. So let's then look across, and in 2002, the top was 191, the bottom was 102. So what is that, about 90-point gap? And then in 2020, we're talking 312. Goodness, look at the difference right there. That's almost 11-point difference. Oh my goodness. That is incredible, that change in the position over 18 years. So in some ways, if you're the top tight end these days, you're bringing home the bacon for your team. And the gap is about, what is that, 55, 155, 167. So the gap is broader as well in total points from top to bottom. Notice the gap in 2002 was much narrower. And so that meant, in some ways, if you were picking tight ends, you were getting a lot of the production of about, certainly the back half was about, I'd say from what, 5th to 10th, you weren't losing that much. But 1, 2, 3, you were probably about the same. So you were a lot more, you had a lot more, I guess, flexibility versus scrambling to pick the top one, like we're kind of in that era now. Taking 2020, we're talking 32-point difference here versus, what is this, 9-point difference from first to second. So very interesting. The landscape has changed. The bottom in each category here is purple. So for the top tight end for each of the year in 18, the bottom 3 were 02, 06, and 16. Okay, and in 2020 was actually the second best in 18 years. So we're living high on the hog here, top tight ends. Second was also in the top, and it was the best second tight ends production we've seen in 18 years. However, the third dropped down to one of the worst, and the fourth, fifth, sixth. So those were almost the same. It's just like if you were doing a tier system after the fact, I know this is not before, you would have had tier 1, tier 2, and then 4 in tier 3, and then probably almost a third tier here of 7th through 12th. So if you missed the top 1 and 2, probably could have waited to the 12th at that point. So this barbell strategy, the data is kind of forcing us into, and I've used that before, is kind of continuing. And certainly in 2020, you either go big early and try to snag the top 1 or 2, or wait, take an all-day sucker and wait. Okay, I would not do draft capital for the third best if the 6th best can get you the same points. You're just wasting capital. Don't do it. Okay, and again, I haven't even got into players yet or teams, any of this other stuff. I like to look at the parameters, right? If you're bowling, right, you see on TV there's gutters on either side. So how wide is the lane you're shooting at, right? If it's, 3 foot versus, 20 feet, big difference on how you bowl. Yep. So it's good to know that. Okay, so you can look at the the green circles, and for the most part, since, as you would predict, 2009, we've had a lot of nice green circles. But notice the trend in the back half of tight ends in recent years. Notice it's kind of red, and it just are not. It's like we had this golden age of the back half of tight ends here from '09 to like 15, and then something happened. Okay. And you're saying, well, is this random? Well, we'll see. We can apply some stats to it and ask some questions that way. I'm not sure we're at that point yet, but I do see that trend. And, we saw that back in the olden days as well. It's funny, the olden days, 18 years ago is the olden days. So it's real funny that the strip of nice production, we're out of that segment. So it's kind of like the three segments. So what will 2021 give us? Most likely what 2020 gave us. That's, if nothing else changes, that's as good a beginning foundation to make your selections for 2021 based on 2020. A lot of people don't ignore that. Some people do ignore it. We'll get into the success and failures from last year to this year. I've got that covered. So we'll see just how that all shapes out there. Okay. So to me, there's some more subtle points. The way I look at this is, it's kind of like taste testing there. If you eat too much, if you're trying multiple cakes, then if you eat too much of the first cake, you don't want the third cake. So if you're doing some taste testing, don't stay too long at the table. Metrics is a lot like that. I understand people, live and die, and they're almost robotically slaves to metrics. And of course, you got those that, ignore metrics, and that's in the past. This is something else. And I'm probably not close to that, but on the scale, I'm closer to, give those metrics a long look, but, have the flexibility to zigzag if you've got to. So, stay flexible, right? It's what, stay thirsty, my friends. Well, stay flexible, my friends, in the metric world, okay? Don't get so cranky over the data. It's just not worth your time. Especially don't fuss and rah-rah over, metric data in any kind of, unless you got money on the table, it's not worth your time or effort. I got bigger fish to fry here looking at the data. And I colorize looking at the columns. So in the previous metrics, this is the same metrics. I just didn't circle everything because I can get a little bit confusing. What I did this time was actually went down and colorized each column from top to bottom as far as high and low. So this allows me to look at 02, 3, and 4. Look at that. Almost the complete positions were some of the lowest that's ever been. Okay, notice the best time to be 6th through 12th tight end was in this years, right? And we've had some hit or misses in here, but for the most part, the trend was pretty good. And notice the era of 2018 and 2020 here. Something happened here. I don't know what happened in here, but notice we kind of have, 2018 was really nice, and 2020 was nice on the top two. Then we didn't see it. So see, it's not as clean as you might make this out to be. Okay, so just be aware of that the data is not as clean. There's still some variation here, and that means it's uncertain. Okay. So right now, I think taking an early shot or waiting, to at least the back half is probably being suggested as a strategy for 2021. Just right now. Okay. Some people, look, if you don't get the top tight end, just like wide receiver corp, you're going to have to make up points somewhere on your team for redraft. Okay, I know there's luck and other things, but overall, across, it's a weekly game. Okay, it is a weekly game, and having the top of any position is good, but the top is not the best every week. Okay, there is variation. But you're still over the season going to have to make up that. So people that draft certain positions late are banking on drafting other positions early and nailing one of the tops. So it all works out when that works, but it blows up when it doesn't. So people say, oh, I did this last year. Well, if you've done it for 20 years and it's worked for you, that's probably a lot better than, last year, because you probably forgot 2 years ago, right? It's even good that you remember the year after, 2019. What did you do? Remember things that are sensational. If you remember my early lessons on psych and biases and things, we always remember those amazing plays that just, forever and ever. So you're always going to remember that year that you won your league by 1 point or something, or you lost by 1 point. Sensational. Okay. Sometimes that clouds your mind. Okay. Don't let it do that. So again, I think nothing here is just overly surprising, but it's another way to use the colorization as a way to annotate the landscape and just consider, kind of the big trends here. I think I've done that for you. So, tight ends, rankings first to sixth, okay, the top half of the top 12, and then 7 to 12, back half. So now we're splitting the data into two layers of the cake here. We're looking at fantasy points and percentage of fantasy point dropping from the average of the top to the bottom. How's that loss? So that means that if you do take the back end, what's it costing you overall? What kind of loss in points are you getting percentage wise? Because you're going to have to make that up. Let's take a look at the data. This is fun stuff here. This is fun. This is fun data for me. So I use different colorization. Green is high, red is not so good in the top half. Back half 7 to 12. Blue is best, red is worst. And percent loss. How's that going for us lately? Well, let's look at percent loss. Not worry about these averages yet. Just kind of get that trend. And notice 2002, we lost from the average of the top 6 to the bottom 30%. 30.6. Lo and behold, 2020, 18 years later, we've arrived at the same loss. You're saying, hold it, didn't you say the points have got? Yes, but remember, if the points are going up across the board, then it's still a loss, right? You're still losing. It's just, yes, I'm scoring more points, but so are the top tight ends. So you're not, it's not like the loss is 3%. If the loss was 3% here instead of 30, then that would definitely skew us to late tight end. If the loss was 60%, it's not, then it would skew us to the early tight end. At 30%, as I look down, uh, that's a little high, okay? But it's not just outrageous, because we've seen 40%, 36, 40%, which are some of the extreme losses that year. So in those years, it paid. So 3 of 18 really paid off buying the earlier tight ends. Notice the back end tight ends probably paid off, okay, in these years. 06, certainly 10, certainly 16, 12, and 13. So we had 3 draft them early. We had, I guess you could say, the extremes, 2 draft them late, and then a skew towards draft them late. But now we're kind of back to, let's call it average. I don't know the median number here. I guess we could figure that out real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So about 26, almost 27% is median. So 30 is a little higher, but not really. 3% above median. We're near average. So we had an average year in loss. Okay, it's kind of like the soup wasn't too hot or cold. It was just right. Okay, baby bear's happy. Okay, so picking, you probably didn't lose so much, right? Picking late, but you didn't probably gain as much as you could have picking early as well, unless you picked the top 1 or 2. So I'm talking 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Golden age of tight ends. You know, maybe down to here. We're not in that. We're at 2015. We're definitely not the top. We're not the bottom. Certainly look at the bottom. Oh my goodness. But the gap was poor. So all tight ends were poor, right? So we're taking a look at that. So again, I don't think there's anything that would skew us 2021 to going away from a barbell approach of drafting, trying to handle the situation. And again, drafting late means you're hoping to gather early. So people will say, oh, I'll draft a late tight end. That's fine. But don't do that if you have no idea what you're doing in running backs or wide receivers. Because if you draft a late tight end and you don't balance it somewhere, then you've wasted all sorts. So people that say, well, I'll draft a late tight end, because they're probably pretty good at running backs or wide receivers or quarterback. In other words, they're making it up somewhere, and their records tell them it's fine. So if your records, your success tells you, hey, you do better at this, then do that. You know, who am I to say ignore what's working for you? I mean, that's the bottom line in this. I would not make myself miserable doing something different. My point is just showing you, here's how I'm seeing things. And if it sounds good or you're not being very successful at, say, tight ends or something, okay, I'm giving you some thought about changing. Change is hard. I know that. I know that. But now maybe you have a basis to change, not some random judgment call or some sensational headline you pick up on some clickbait place. Oh, I'm going to do that. This is the hot new sleeper or whatever. I don't know. What the hell does that mean? Really? Does that really help you? Especially if you're telling the world, right? What is it? Go the track, and if everybody's saying this horse is going to win, including the hot dog man, it's probably not a good pick. right? You want something nobody's knowing about except you, right? Sacred knowledge helps you in a game that's pari-mutuel or information based, right? If everybody knows the sleepers, then it's not very good, now is it? Okay, continuing our journey here. Okay, let's move on. So this is my graph. Sorry. And it shows the data points. Green is the average across the years of the first through six. So that's the top half average. The bottom average is 7 to 12. And then the trend lines are polynomial trend lines, and there's your loss in purple. So it looks to me, we look at the loss, we kind of have this time, we kind of have this time, and we're a little bit back here. So I think the idea of 3 segments over the 18 years is confirmed. Okay, I'll buy that. The gaps are a little interesting to me, but if you look at the lines, I think we've actually seen a little bit more of a gap. Okay, a little bit. We kind of came back about average. Notice the gaps were very short during here. So late tight ends were favored here. The bigger gaps are the early tight ends are favored. Okay, and there may be a skew to the earlies, but see how the gap, maybe. I don't think I would steer myself away from picking early, but it's clearly we're not in this era here of the loss being so low. So until I see this number down to here, okay, in the gap percent of 20%, okay, if we see something coming up next year, then I'm thinking, okay. But right now, there's nothing that suggests we're in a late tight end skew position. We're probably in an average position that would, you can make your living on both sides of the barbell. That's how I take it. Okay, so I think this kind of continues that. That's what the trends are talking to me. I know I hear the data in my head, right? Crazy, Dr. Bush. Just for funsies, I went ahead and did the 13th through 18th, 19th through 24th. Some people are in tight end premium leagues or maybe 2 tight end leagues. Okay, what's going on there? Look at the gaps here. 2020 was 21. It's one of the highest gaps that we've seen. I mean, 22, 28. So maybe 6th highest. So the loss is, I think, still skewing us maybe a little bit in this level to the higher tight end. So I guess if I'm picking my second or third tight end, look at 24, 13, 22. Seems like there's extremes. 2018 extreme one way, big loss. 2019, not a much loss in this, and we're back closer to the extreme. So what is it, 2 out of 3? I think I'd probably lean towards the top half in my second or third tight ends. I don't think I'd go beyond the 18th. I don't think I'm that good to begin with to pick And it's probably touchdown dependent anyway at this point. But that's what the data's telling me, that if I'm drafted late, then I might be picking two tight ends. Maybe one from 6th or 7th to 12th, and then another one before the 18th. Okay, so I think that's what I would do. Or if I drafted early, then I'd be waiting till this era to pick up my second tight end. Obviously, having a good schedule and a tight end that can score a touchdown or two is always, if there's some skewed that way, like they only wake up in the red zone, okay, then you might want to grab them. Here's that. Notice the gaps are very fine to begin with. So we're basing our data on very small numbers compared to the top 12. And you see that all the time. The differences become very slight the further you go in the draft on average. Notice the waviness of the loss pattern. There's just nothing here. See, we had two highs and a low here. Remember, I told you that, kind of two highs and a low. So that's going to be late. That's going to tend to be early, and this is probably early-ish, 13th to 18th. So I think I'm going that way, but just do note, this is skewing back to later tight ends and maybe average. So, I mean, there's no big consensus. It's not steady by any means here, these metrics. So just want to let you know that you're parsing even less differences and even more uncertain players here. But I'll show you the data anyway. Okay. Variation wise, it's always good to know where uncertainty exists. Are you in a minefield or not? I show the high uncertainty, high variation, and the low variation in blue, highs in red. And our friend 2020, we had the highest variation within the top 6. And you saw that top 1 and 2, and then you just dropped, the bottom dropped out. Notice very low variation. So that idea, wait all day, that's what this kind of low variation is telling you. Here's some low variation, wait towards the 18th, higher variation here. Relative to the position, notice I'm not going across, I'm going within the columns. Okay, you've got to do it that way. Okay, so 2020 was, notice the inside 7th to 18th, we had kind of this continuum of the same player in some ways, okay, versus the extremes on either side. So for a broad look, you're really taking an uncertainty bath 19th through 24th. But the years before wasn't that way. So it was a funny year. People think, oh, tight end was the same. Wasn't necessarily. I mean, we had the highest variation in 18 years. That's never the same. Okay, so sometimes variation gives you a little warning here, but there's no trend consistent. I mean, we had it here. Here's 2 years. But then, we have 2 years low. But we had high, low, high again. I don't know. We going to get low? So that's the only thing when you have some type of zigzag pattern. It's not, you don't have as much clarity as you might think. If you only look at 2020, then you would assume high variation again and skew very early, like the top tight end. I wouldn't even mess with the second one. if you're good enough to pick the first one. Okay, I'm sure people are thinking that's Kelsey. Kittle per game average, though, didn't do too bad. Okay, if you look at per game, if you take the injury out of it. Here is the variation. I just plotted it. You know, I know you love to see lots of mysterious dots and squiggles. Squiggles to me show us the variation, and the red is the 19 to 24. Look at that. Oh my goodness. Look at that skew. So we saw the highest in the 19th to 24th of uncertainty in 2020. And guess what? The highest in the first to sixth. So the extreme edges of our data was some of the most uncertain high variation we've ever seen. We haven't quite seen it that crazy. Okay, so 2020 was not a normal year. And by the way, you heard people saying that? I hadn't heard anybody saying that. You hear me saying it. Just telling you. Here it is. This is why I say it. Okay, I'm not just guessing. Like, I wonder. Okay. No. We let the data talk to us a little bit. Not shout at us, because we got to be flexible, right? Stay flexible, my friend. So, anyway, there you go. Looking at that. Notice the low variation in the middles, the 7th through 18th. Nice. But notice almost on top of each other. Here we go again. Isn't that interesting? You're saying, well, when this happened, it wasn't as crazy. It was a little high, but wasn't as crazy as 20. No. We had some weird stuff happening last year, and it might be COVID. This may be symptomatic of the COVID list. This kind of extremities going on here. So we might be back to this kind of data points here, which would be closer to what has been the case. So we might be not as extremes, and maybe the extreme in the tight ends last year was COVID related. Maybe I should think about that a little more. Just to let you know, I just thought about that, re-looking at the data a little bit, right? Okay, let me think about things. Okay, I'm going to have to file that away and looking at that. So just be aware. Now, with that saying, if we have lots of COVID, then we might be back here. So with all the variants, I'm thinking we have a higher chance of being up here than we are here with no COVID. That's what I'm thinking, but I do note that. So I hadn't thought about that before. It's nice. Y'all caught me. Oh my God, Dr. Bush, you're thinking, yeah. Even if I've thought about it and say, okay, practice what I'm doing, it can still change. Stay flexible, my friend. I like that. Last year's variation, last year's ranks versus this year's ranks. So, if you blindly use last year's player ranking, how does that work out for you this year? And I look from 2014 to 2020, and we've got the numbers, and the numbers are in. And now this is great data for the running backs. You need to go and review that. Okay, anything minus means that there was a drop based on last year versus this year. So 2014 -1 meant that the top ranked tight end from 2013, okay, he came in second in 2014. That means in 15, the top was still the top. In 16, the top dropped all the way down to the 25th position. Notice, look at the zeros at the top position. Goodness, you don't see that anywhere else. Okay, you don't see that anywhere else. Tight ends are almost infallible at the top rank from last year. Just be aware of that. That just jumps out at you. It's got to. Here's failures versus successes. I consider minus 25 a failure. So I got 1 failure, 6 successes. That is remarkable for being so early. So people say, I ignore last year. You would have only been in the last, 7 years, you would have been right 1. The other 6 people that followed last year's metrics would have beat you. 2 failures, second, little squirrely at the third, very squirrely fourth, but the 5th is back. But then notice the trend for the most part. It's kind of funny that the top 2 are consistently strong, whereas the 3rd through 10th, 11th, there's a lot of variation. Notice we see another wave of successes in 12th through 21st. Be aware of that. And it looks like the 22nd I would probably avoid, just the way I'm looking. But looking at trying to make these trends work here. Very interesting data. And you should begin with the top 2 from 2020 as a touchstone. Just begin there. Don't try to Ouija somebody up the board. You can only eliminate them and drop them down. Don't take somebody down and put them over. This is how you would do it. Okay, here's the data points, success and failures. Notice extreme success here. Look at this. It's crazy. Low failures. Notice they come back and get much more closer. Right here. Very close. Okay. So it looks like you can have a lot more shifting from last year's rankings after the second tight end. So I think that makes your job a little bit easier. In other words, you can feel good about grabbing a 13th tight end from last year and thinking they may show up 3rd or 4th or 5th. That's what the data's suggesting, that how we play this. On average, that's how we should play this. Gets a little crazy after that. Okay. Kind of diverges. Look at the gaps in here. Very strange. Okay. So, but I think my first tight end, I'm probably starting with the top 2, or I'm shifting the data sieve here and seeing maybe I can find that late bargain. So if you're going late picking, I wouldn't use last year's rankings, written in blood by any means. Okay. So it's a refinement of that early versus late barbell approach. Yes, if you're going early, you're probably sticking with what you saw last year, assuming something strange doesn't happen, injury or something. And if they're still, was it Waller and Kelsey? I think it was. But if you're going past those 2, then hey, have fun looking. I think you might find something. So I think there's a movement towards that. I think that's what the metrics is telling us. Neat stuff, I think. Failures and success. The median drop from last year to that. So take a look. I do see still a -7, so it's a little riskier, -9. So maybe the first is, I think the first is a sure deal, right? Okay, look at the low variation even in the second, but it drops 7 on the median. And then here's some areas here, it's not too bad. And, you know, I think it's variation's kind of low, but you're getting higher and way high variation here. I'm avoiding 21st down for sure. Okay. But there's a little bit of pocket of variation in here too, that 3rd to 10th or 9th. So I'm still kind of liking that thinking I just had. Here's the median in blue. Here's the variation. So low variation gets higher, but then really takes off late. So I think I'm stopping here on any kind of probably looking for a second tight end kind of thing. I wouldn't go too late, too deep for your second tight end. I think I'm going early, but then I'm shifting the data around and seeing who I can find that may have been missed or should have been better than they were, COVID, injury, whatnot. Have some fun. I think we have an opportunity here to, utilize our draft capital well if we use that approach. I'm liking that. Okay, I end you with that. I found some interesting things. Again, when I look at data, sometimes it whispers to me, sometimes it hits me over the head. Anyway, you have been through another scintillating episode of The Process. My name is Dr. John Bush. We're having fun at Professor Fantasy 1, is it? On Twitter, I write for Fake Pigskin. You love those guys. Great group. Pay attention to all of them. They will help you win your league. Okay. We'll see you next time. Having fun here.